Okay, quite a few months back you would remember I started building a split top Roubo workbench, and I had to sort of give out because it was a fairly difficult time in the family with a few issues, and I just didn't really want to be thinking about videos. So I went ahead and made it off camera, so the project got delayed. Now the good news is we're starting the build. So what you can see in front of me here is my split top Roubo. So it measures about 2.3 meters long, about 630 millimeters wide, and the height was just what I felt right for my application, so the height will vary. Now, a workbench like this can run into the thousands easily, and that really depends on your wood selection and your hardware selection. So what sort of vices are you going to use? What sort of hardwood are you going to use? And all of those sort of questions. Now, the key to my workbench is budget. So while, yes, I have a big workspace so I can afford to go as big or as small as I like, I still want it to be budget friendly because at the end of the day, I've got to pay the bills, and the more money I put into a workbench is the less money I have for that. So when we talk about budget, the price range that I'm looking at is coming in under $300. So when you consider that this bench is going to be a lifelong investment, that is pretty cheap, and it is something you'll use in every project, so it becomes a tool that you use all the time. So that $300 is very cheap when you compare it to something like a 15-inch or 20-inch thicknesser, or even your table saw. Now, plans are going to be made available for this build, and I'm going to be trying to get as much detail in them as possible. So as soon as they're complete, they are going to be available, but keep in mind, because this is such a large project and it's going to take several weeks out of my working time, so that's time that I could be spending on customers' commissions, I am going to have to charge a small fee. Now, I say small because it's only going to be $5, but that's just going to kind of help me keep on top of my bills and things like that, and also help pay for all the timber. So while I would like to make it free, it's just not plausible because, let's face it, I'm in a fairly large workshop, and yes, it does cost money to rent this place. Okay, so I've had this workbench for a couple of months now, in fact, several months, and I've sort of discovered a few things which I like, a few things which I don't necessarily think are ideal, and a few things which I think I should change, and that's just what I'm going to go over now. So the things that I really like are the round dog holes in the top. So that just opens up windows to a whole lot of pre-made accessories. So you've got your hold downs like these, your bench dogs, of course. So you clamp your work pieces between your tail vise and your bench dog, and that means it's really easy to hand plane your boards and keep them nice and flat. I really like having a leg vise. Now, this style of leg vise, where it's a single pivot, you have a lot of jaw capacity. There's a lot more capacity between the top of your bench and the actual screw, so you can get bigger work pieces in there. And really, it's just very versatile. So if you've got sort of tapered legs in there, you can easily clamp and things like that. So we're definitely keeping that leg vise. Now, while I love the leg vise, the tail vise could go with a bit of modification. So I'm really happy with having the tail vise, and I'm not going to be changing this design to have a different style of vise, but I do want to make it so it has more capacity. So we're going to be having an increased screw length, which means that our travel between the actual, I guess it's the jaw of the vise and the workbench, is greatly increased. So slightly more expensive, but definitely worth it in the long run. A few other things that I really like is having this storage shelf below. So a workbench like this does take up a very large footprint of your workshop. So having storage below sort of gets some of that back. So we're definitely going to be keeping that. In fact, we might even be able to improve it by making a dedicated plane till or something like that. But this is something we're definitely going to keep. Now, another thing that I dislike about this bench, while it's not a big deal, is the length. So I've made this 2.4 meters long, and while it's okay, I just very rarely use it. So I don't see the point of having a second workbench which is this long. So the length is going to be cut down a little bit, but as far as the width goes, I feel that this width, which is about 630, 650 millimeters, is perfect because I can reach across the workbench easily and not have to strain to get to the other side. Now, the last thing that I do like about this workbench, which is not really necessary, is having this end cap here with a dovetail. So a contrasting end cap with a dovetail just makes the bench look a whole lot nicer in my opinion, so we're definitely going to keep that in our next workbench. Because this bench is going to be built on a budget, we're kind of limited on what timber that we're going to use. Now, In my mind, you've got a choice of pine or pine. Now, of course, if you want to increase your budget and go to a nicer wood like something like maple if you're in America, or Tassie oak here in Australia or something like that, you can for sure, but because I'm on a budget, I'm limiting it to pine, which you can get at any hardware store across Australia for relatively cheap. So this is just your standard 90 by 45 construction pine, which is non-treated. So if you do choose to go for a separate timber than pine, keep in mind that you don't want it to be, well, you don't want it to be too hard or too soft. So say that the majority of your projects are made out of pine, which is a relatively soft wood, and you make your bench out of jarrah, which is an incredibly dense wood. Anytime that you knock your workpiece, I should say, onto your workbench, you're going to be denting your workpiece, not your workbench. So keep that in mind, that you don't want your workbench to be made out of a substantially harder wood than the majority of your projects. Now, I'm just going to be assuming that the majority of you guys are going to be using the same timber as me, which is your standard construction non-treated pine. And when you shop for pine like this, there's a lot of things that you need to look out for, because often the grade of timber is not ideal. So I'll move the camera into the workbench. I'll get a few examples of things that you got to look out for. So when you go looking for your timber, you know what to look out for. Okay, so I've got these 3 pieces of pine up here, which will give you an example of 3 things that you really need to look out for when you're selecting your timber for your workbench. Now, it's not a bad idea to actually set half a day aside to go around to 3 or 4 separate hardware stores and select the best timber that you can from each of those shops. So go through their entire pile and find the best pieces. Now, if that's not an option, just take your time and go through the pile and try and get the timber with the least amount of defects. Now, it's going to be incredibly unlikely that you're going to find work pieces which are completely free of knots. Now, you've got 2 sorts of knots. You've got your dead knots, like this one here, which means that the timber is dried out and sort of starting to separate from the rest of the workpiece. Or you've got your living knots. So this is like a branch which was growing when the tree was cut down and milled. Now, live knots aren't quite as big of a deal because they are a little bit more stable than your dead knots. But they do introduce problems when it comes down to flattening or milling your timber, because it changes the direction of grain from end grain to long grain and things like that. So if possible, try and get workpieces with the minimal amount of knots throughout the length. Another very common thing in this sort of cheaper construction pine is wane. Now, wane is just a bark inclusion. So you can see that we've got a nice crisp corner on this side, but on the other corner, it's sort of rounded over and not quite flat. Now, if you have any wane in your workpieces, it can cause a problem with your lamination because, well, there's going to be a lot of places throughout your boards which have no glue contact. But as long as it is limited to one side and relatively short lengths like this one is, it will be okay. So you'll see on the other side of this workbench, we've got no waning whatsoever. Now, the other thing that you really want to sort of avoid when you're selecting your timber is twisting, cupping and bowing. So if you've got any twist in your workpieces, probably give it a pass, because you don't want to be spending hours milling and flattening your workpieces. Now, a little bit of bowing is okay because you can sort of counteract the effect of the bow by gluing 2 bow pieces together with the bows facing out, and that will sort of help straighten those workpieces. And cupping, as long as it's minimal, when you send it through your thicknesser, you will get rid of it. So really, the major thing is no twist and minimal amount of cupping and bowing. So if you take your time and choose the best possible workpieces which are the straightest and clearest of defects, your entire build is going to be sped up because, well, the amount of milling that you need to do to get these pieces laminated together is going to be greatly reduced. So it is definitely worthwhile. The other thing that I just really want to say is that because I know the majority of you guys won't have access to a workshop like mine with a 15-inch jointer and a 15-inch thicknesser and a, band saws, radial arm saws and things like that, I'm going to be trying to limit the amount of machinery that I do use in this project to to those items which I think is pretty readily available to most people. So bunch top thicknesser will be fine, so the bench top thicknesses I should say. a chop saw or a miter saw, and a plunge router. So a handheld plunge router will get this workbench made. Now, of course, if you have bigger machines, it will make it a lot faster, but when you do see me use my other machinery, I'll give you examples of methods that you can use to achieve the same results with fewer tools. So if this seems like a video that is going to be interesting to you, make sure you do subscribe to my channel. So click the big subscribe button down there and you'll be notified in your feed of my weekly videos which come out on this workbench build. Now, if you weren't aware, I also have a second channel. So this is my George's Woodshop blog channel, and I'll be putting up a lot of shorter sort of videos which go into maybe a bit of detail on 1 or 2 items at a time. So it might be more detail on the tail vise install or more detail on the slab gluer. But if you don't want to miss out on any of the details on this workbench build, make sure you do subscribe to that channel as well. So head over to youtube.com/jwsblog and subscribe to that channel, because there's going to be more content coming on that channel as well. Now, of course, I've got the website, so georgewoodshop.com. So if you're not on YouTube and you still want to see the videos, just head over there a couple of times a week and you'll see if there's any new videos posted. Or if you are on Facebook, you can like that page, and I post all the videos on there as well. So facebook.com/georgewoodshop. Just make sure if you do like my Facebook page that you click the settings and say see all from this post or see all from this page, because if you don't do that, there's a pretty high chance that you won't actually see all of my posts that I make. So head over there and like that page. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for the milling and top slab lamination, or the top slab glue up.